Hello and welcome. I am Mara Cepeda. This is Rappler Talk. We are here today with Deputy Speaker Miro Quimbo, who is also the congressman for Marikina's 2nd District. We are gonna talk to him today about his tax reform proposal and of course being a Liberal Party member in the House of Representatives. Hello, sir.
Hi.
And I'm just gonna go and dive right into it.
All right.
Okay, you have a three-phased tax reform proposal in the 17th Congress, which include adjusting the income tax brackets to inflation, reducing the corporate tax rate from 30% to 25%, and the granting of the amnesty to estate taxes. So why make a three-phased proposal?
Um, Essentially, it's three-phased only because I've always been anticipating that for the longest time when I became chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means in the past Congress, the main argument against tax reform was always that they wanted something really comprehensive. And in that respect, that's always been a stumbling block because while the injustices as far as our fixed income workers are concerned is very clear, very apparent, and to which they've already admitted. But in order for them to refuse it, the carte blanche answer has always been, let's do it on a comprehensive way. So I've always said that there's things that we can address in the immediate. It's like curing a person, meaning person is already in ICU. Certainly, you cannot bring him out of his sickness unless you do it in a comprehensive manner. But you have to do it on a step-by-step basis, meaning get his oxygen level up, control his blood pressure, make sure if there's any blood clot that we remove it, meaning the first phase really is an emergency process.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Because while as each day passes that we are unable to fix the income tax on individuals, it's each day of injustice. Meaning, for the longest time, the Department of Finance has been refusing any form of remedy or even recognizing that it is currently unjust. And until we were able to get our own data and present these data, and of which many they've not been able to controvert, they finally admitted. Because the situation is that 20% of total tax revenues comes from individual taxpayers like you and me.
Yeah.
Meaning if you see from your pay slip that there's a deduction, whether as a consultant withheld at source or whether as a fixed income salary worker, when you see on the 15th or the 30th, may bawas sa tax, you are a fixed income salary worker. And unfortunately, you happen to be almost 9 out of, or you happen to contribute 90% of the entire pie being collected from all individuals. Now, what is the irony there? The irony there is that while we as fixed income salary workers shoulder almost 90% of total tax collected, in the total population of tax or individuals who earn from the economy, we are actually just 16%.
Really?
So the injustice is 16% of the individuals working in our economy or profiting from it, only 16% shoulder close to 90% of the total tax collection. So obviously there's something wrong there because the burden is being shouldered by just very few individuals. I'm not saying that everybody should because certainly fixed minimum wage workers should be exempt because they need the living wage. You cannot collect taxes from them. But all we're saying is that there are so many others who should be paying but are not paying. Businessmen, small businessmen, entrepreneurs, people who run carinderias, people who run small businesses like hardwares, tiange owners, none of them issue receipts. In fact, based on the data, is that close to 70% of them don't even pay a single peso of tax. So when on the other aspect, you look at professionals, doctors, lawyers like myself, engineers. When was the last time you went to a doctor and the doctor issued to you a receipt? Each time you go to a doctor and ask for one, they'll say, okay, but we will put in an additional 12% VAT because you're asking for a receipt. What we don't realize is that, of course, they're pushing us not to ask for the receipt because otherwise it will be more costly on us. That in itself is illegal, but be that as it may. What's happening there actually is you save yourself 12% by not having the receipt issued as a patient. You save 12%. but the doctor actually saves 30% in terms of income taxes
Okay.
because that transaction is no longer going to be reported. So I'm not generalizing, but the data is very clear that 70% of them don't pay taxes of us, professionals, meaning, like I said, engineers, lawyers. So the biggest injustice is what we're trying to address is that we need to be able to adjust the current taxes so that those that are currently paying should pay a lower tax or a tax as originally envisioned in 1997. Yun lang yun. That's really the first step. Of course, the second and more comprehensive step, if some of the steps actually have already been, in a sense, preempted by the comprehensive program that was submitted by the Department of Finance, because the second step essentially is really finding a threshold income where we shift to gross taxation.
Okay.
Ibig sabihin, if you make 250,000 or 300,000 and below, you don't pay a single peso of tax. We don't look at anymore whether you have dependents, because as it is today, the compliance is or computation is quite complex. So for each married individual, you get a 50% deduction. If you're the head of a family, you also get that. For each dependent, you get 25,000 peso. And you know, the BIR and employers spend a lot of time trying to collect on birth certificate, marriage certificates, making sure that you have to go to the NSO. It's just too cumbersome. That in the end, we're better off just having a threshold income based on gross.
Okay.
Magkano bang nakukuha mo, less your statutory deductions of SSS or GSIS, and then we base it from that. So that's really the next step. But like I said, the step-by-step process is necessitated simply because there are certain things that need to be addressed today and they cannot wait.
So, sir, what's the logic behind proposing to lower the corporate tax rate to 25%?
The corporate income tax lowering is a function of three things.
Okay.
First, we need to lower it to make, because it's really the highest in the entire ASEAN. Meaning, from a standalone basis within this country, I mean, you put yourself in the shoes of a businessman. If you say that 30% will go into taxes, you know what that is? That's more than 3 months of your revenue in 1 year. You're going to surrender to the government. And especially if the government is not as credible, they see congressmen stealing money, they see politicians riding in very expensive cars. Many of them don't really see the incentive to do it. And like I said, 3 months of revenue is just too much to cough up. So the thrust really is you want to make it lower because everywhere else in the world, there is a direct relationship between high taxes as against high evasion.
Okay.
So the higher your taxes, the higher evasion. Why? Because you're better off just paying off bribery to the revenue officers because it's just too much. It's not. It's much like criminal laws. When the penalty is inordinately and unjustifiably too harsh, jaywalking, you get penalized 10,000 pesos. Nobody's going to bring you to court, and so you can cough up the 10,000.
Yeah.
You'll end up paying 500 pesos, and the law enforcer will. You give that law enforcer an incentive or a weapon to scare you. So, like I said, because they're too high, it promotes, in fact, the injustice promotes tax evasion. Secondly, is that we need to lower it to make the country really competitive.
Okay. And in light of the ASEAN integration.
In line of the ASEAN economic integration, we have the highest corporate income tax rate. And there's a direct relationship. I mean, if a person or an investor, look, I mean, we pale in comparison in terms of foreign direct investment as against the ASEAN Big Six. We're the last. Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, completely far away laggard. And the reason for that is one of the reasons, or three main reasons that they say is, a foreign investor will say, why will I go to the Philippines if 30% of my income is going to be taken by government? While in Vietnam, they'll actually give me zero taxes for the first 3 years. Or if they levy, they'll levy 8 to 12%. So I think it doesn't take a really intelligent investor to say that the cost of doing business is so much higher in the Philippines, they're not going to come here. And the absence of, or the uncompetitiveness of the tax rates really brings about a direct impact on employment. We've come to accept that the reason why poverty eradication, despite the economic growth in the last 6 years during the Aquino administration, poverty reduction has barely been touched. From 26, it has gone down to 23%, when in fact the impact should be higher.
Really?
And one of the main reasons there is really the absence of any manufacturing-based employment. And these industries will only come about if you have direct investors. And investors will not come in unless we're able to make the environment more friendly.
Okay.
And one of the three main reasons, as I said, is really the high taxes. And then thirdly, is really for better tax administration.
Okay.
Right now, we have a different host of taxes, meaning depending on the nature of the business, nag-iiba-iba yung tax rates. So we want to lower it, but at the same time standardize it. I think as a first step, 25%, in fact, it's still high, but it will at least allow our finance managers to be able to cushion the financial impact it will have. Of course, certainly, if we want to meet the objectives of making the country more competitive, we really have to lower it. But I think making it lower or equal to that of our ASEAN neighbors will have a dire financial impact.
Okay. Of the three bills that I mentioned earlier, your bill on granting the amnesty and estate taxes was already approved by the House Committee on Ways and Means. And you have said that it's supposed to address the triple deadlock on being experienced in the Philippines in terms of non-compliance, low tax collection, and idle property. So can you explain that more for us today?
Many of the reason for which there's economic stagnation much in the rural areas is the fact that they can't access credit. And credit is important for a farmer or for any other person to be able to carry out a business or to have social mobility. Many of the lands in the rural areas are are idle, they're not productive, because they're mired in inheritance tax issues. So inheritance tax in this country is way, way higher than, on many occasions, the penalties have already outrun the value of the property. In short, even if you want to transfer it already today, but because of the high rate and at the same time because of the penalties, the amount of taxes is actually going to be higher than the value of the property. So why sell it? So you just let it be, and then, or you lease it informally to some other person or to your neighboring farmer who will use it. But really, it's very unproductive until credit is introduced there or to make it really more productive. And like I said, it's really one way for us to be able to liquefy these assets.
Okay.
We cannot force people to keep retaining these properties. First, it's not productive. And then secondly, is that this is really going to be the way out. And thirdly, is that besides, the collection we get from estate taxes is so low. We collected just in 2013 a little over ₱1 billion, which is 0.08, less than 0.1 of total tax collection. So in short, we're tightly guarding an empty vault.
Really? Okay.
So what we need to do is we need to put down our guards. Let's open that vault and let's see what can be done. And we want to lower the rate, not so that it can be equal to capital gains. So that way is many of these families that own properties in the provinces or even in Metro Manila, you inherit something from your mother or father, you'll have to cough out close to 20% of the value. You have a 5 million house, which a BR will value. You're not a 5 million house today. Does not really belong to somebody who's pretty well off. But you'll have to cough out approximately almost $1 million.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. So people don't transfer it, and when you don't, you can't use it as a collateral for a business. You cannot. All the other heirs cannot get cash. so that they can use it instead to pump the economy or send their kids to better schools. So that's what it really does. And I'm happy the Department of Finance agrees with it. Rarely, in the rare times we agree.
Now, the Department of Finance is proposing a comprehensive tax proposal under the Duterte administration, but some of your colleagues in the House have dubbed it as anti-poor, and they are citing certain provisions there. For example, the VAT exemptions on the elderly, the persons with disabilities, and even the fuel excise taxes. Are these proposals necessary even?
I think that's the most important question to ask. It's not whether who is going to be hit or there are two principles in taxation. The first thing is really necessity.
Okay.
Because the power to tax is the power to destroy. That's the philosophy of any law student will tell you that taxation is not collecting taxes, but in fact is the power to destroy. Meaning, if it is not handled correctly, it will destroy a person, it will destroy the finances of a family, of a corporation. So, we need to make sure that when this power given by the Constitution to government is exercised, you must first be able to prove that it is necessary. And I feel like it's not at this point.
Really?
It's not because...
Which one in particular?
Most of it. Most particularly excise tax on fuel, the withdrawal of VAT exemption for senior citizens, the increase in taxes, like I said, on diesel, on aviation fuel, on kerosene. These are things, or on LPG. These are things that will affect so many people, but it's not really necessary. Why is it not necessary? I don't think it's necessary at this point in time because there are other areas where you can collect taxes from.
Like where?
Like where? Like for instance, we've mentioned earlier that there is a huge gap in terms of compliance for professionals. It's been computed that just with professionals alone, you're looking at 68 billion that can be collected if we can just do it efficiently. Meaning if we can find a way, look, this government has shown that if it can decide to put the strong arm of infrastructure of government on something, something will happen. You're looking at the drug issue, and I think they're making strides. Setting aside criticisms, they're making gargantuan strides in that area. But before I go there, is that you can get 68 billion from professionals. You look at the leakages that come from the Bureau of Customs. These are not data which came from us. This is data coming from the Department of Finance. We lose 200 billion pesos every year. That's 547 million pesos a day. Assuming the Bureau of Customs works 7 days a week. That's 547 million a day that we should be collecting, but we're not because of corruption in the Bureau of Customs. And people are able to smuggle.
And that's why the common Filipino taxpayer looks at taxes as a huge burden, diba? And
Yes.
they keep, and they say it's so much worse because the government is supposedly corrupt. And so it's just mas malaking burden sa kanila, sir.
Yeah. Yun ang sinasabi natin. Ang sinasabi natin is, first, let's answer first, kailangan ba? Wala na bang mapagkunan? Ang sinasabi natin, meron eh. So, nakita natin sa Bureau of Customs, ang laki-laki ng gap dyan na pwedeng makolekta. Look at the cases filed in the last administration over the last 6 years. You know the total tax collection that they're looking at in terms of claims?
Yes.
I think it's like 75 trillion.
Really? That
meaning,
high?
Meaning, of course, you make a demand because you file the case on the basis of that. But let's even say it's just 10% of that. So, that's 7 trillion. In short, that's the amount of tax gap which the government has already filed cases on. Yung mga nahuli na nila yun at may nakafile na kaso. So, even on that basis alone, you already know that meron pwedeng pagkunan. So, the issue here is there is a corruption issue. The drug issue is a corruption issue. It is. I mean, whatever, it's a social problem, etc., whatever. Yes, it is. You talk about it being a social problem, but really, for me, principally, it's a corruption issue.
Okay.
The police are supposed to stop it. I know where drug pushing happens, at least in terms of vicinity in my area. And I'm sure the police knows exactly who these creatures are. And they've managed to do that. That's why, but because of corruption, they've allowed this to proliferate.
They turn a blind eye.
They turn a blind eye, not necessarily turn a blind eye, but I think for most, it's really a conspiracy because they make money from it. But when the president said, stop, I'm going to kill you if you, they've literally, I think 50% have stopped. The issue of tax collection is also an issue of corruption. So if we can impose that will on the drug menace, which is certainly more dangerous, I think we can do it here. We should be doing it here. So all I'm saying is that there is a way for us to collect without having to impose new taxes.
And we can expect you to lobby strongly for tax reform in the House.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
But-
Congressman, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. But I said, those are two things in terms of taxation. You need to show the necessity.
Of course.
And I've said that no, it's not necessary. But even assuming it's necessary, the second aspect of taxation is that if you're able to prove na kailangan talaga siya, the second precept or principle of taxation is that it has to be imposed in a progressive manner.
Okay.
Meaning it has to be imposed on those that have the ability to actually pay it. It doesn't mean you have to impose it equally. That's the biggest misconception in terms of taxation. No. We impose taxation or taxes according to the burden that they can carry.
I see.
You know, taxation is much like, when I try to explain it, taxation is like the best analogy people can understand is the archaic or the old philosophy of bayanihan.
Okay, how
Meaning,
does that
meaning people carry a house from one field to the next because they're transferring, whatever it is, and people come together to carry it. But when they actually carry it, not everybody exerts the same amount of effort.
That's
The bigger the person, man or woman, will exert more effort and will contribute more because that's their capacity. But what's happening today is many of those strong persons actually there are few people na paying taxes carrying that house, that bahay kubo. In fact, ibang mga malalakas, nakasakay pa sa bahay kubo eh.
Totoo
Diba?
yan, sir.
Na pinapasan na ng mga ordinaryong mga guro na walang choice, yung mga fixed income salary workers, dahil sila lang ang captured market talaga ng taxation. So, what am I saying? I'm simply saying that even if they're able to prove that these taxes are necessary to sustain our economic growth, the remedies that they have chosen where taxes will come from is wrong. It's wrong because I think it's anti-people, it's anti-poor. Why? Because what are they proposing? First, they're proposing an excise tax on all forms of fuel. Today, in 2006, government, the Department of Finance, specifically exempted or only imposed excise tax on leaded and unleaded diesel. And because these are leaded and unleaded gasoline. Why? Ito yung mga ginagamit ng private vehicles.
Yes.
Exempted ang diesel because it's used by the buses and the public utility jeeps. Exempted ang kerosene kasi ang gumagamit yan ay mga mahihirap as for cooking or for their fishing vessels. Exempted ang LPG because pinaka-apektado dyan ay yung mga mahihirap din. Exempted din or napakaliit din ng aviation fuel because it's the tourism industry that will get affected by that. And what they're doing now is they're increasing from 5 pesos yung excise tax on leaded and unleaded, gagawin 10 piso. Yung diesel, gagawin nilang from 0 to 6 pesos. Kerosene, 0 to 6 pesos. LPG will increase also from 0 to 6 pesos. The effect of each one, just on LPG, is a 25% increase. Without any increase in the world market for natural gas or LPG gas. Magtataas ka agad siya just because of taxes. So, ang kerosene, ang diesel, ang karamihan dyan gumagamit, public utility jeep, at saka mga buses. So, sino ang maapektuhan dyan? Hindi naman yung mga mayayaman eh. So, ang mangyayari dito is, sabi nila, okay, let's give the tax reform for the middle class because really they're suffering, we now admit it. Pero mag-pass tayo ng additional taxes on excise taxes.
Yes.
Nilipat lang nila from the middle class to the lower classes, to the poor. And I think that's really being short-sighted. But why do they do it? Because it's just so freaking easier to do. Why? Because it's a captured market. Each time you go to the gas station, pump prices, andun na yun. Pagbawi ng value-added tax exemption sa mga senior citizen or from the disabled, each time you buy, bayad ka kagad. It's not gonna work. It's unfair, it's anti-poor, and it's not going to work because even with the current excise tax, meron na kasi excise tax ngayon on leaded and unleaded. Even the collection there is continuously going down. Meaning, there is again an implementation corruption issue that's happening. So kahit paanong idagdag natin, sabi ko nga, parang kang nagluluto ng chop suey at gobyerno ang nagluluto ng chop suey. Hinahanap mo, tinitingnan mo bakit hindi nagkakasya parati sa pamilya. Dinadagdagan mo ng gulay, ng sahog, lahat. Kahit ano gawin mo, asin, it's still not enough. It still does not seem to fit. Why? You keep collecting more taxes, adding more tax laws. Butas yung kaldero, pare. Butas yung kaldero. There's a leakage happening in the Bureau of Customs and the BIR. And until you're able to fix the mechanism of collection, whatever new taxes you will have, it's not going to work.
Speaking of new taxes, you have a colleague in the House, Congressman Rodel Batocabe, who proposed na instead of fuel excise taxes na lang, he's proposing that the DOF impose taxes on beauty products and cosmetic surgery. And it sparked some a hashtag on Twitter called "Don't Tax My Beauty" because of course the people who are into these products are saying, oh, bakit mo itataxan yung ginagamit namin sa pang-araw-araw? Would you agree with this sort of proposal that he wants the DOF to formulate? Wag na daw sa fuel, dito na lang, beauty products na lang, sir.
Well, he has to remember that 54% of the population are women. And I think of that population, a great number actually use makeup. But no, but levity aside, you know, excise taxes are luxury taxes. You impose them because these are commodities that are essentially frivolous. Expensive cars, expensive jewelry, high-priced goods, or if these are health risks. You look at tobacco, you look at alcohol. So these are things that are taxed. But I think it's far too small a segment to be looking at. Secondly, I don't think it's a luxury item at this point in time because it has become a necessity. Minimum wage workers today who work in Shoemart or Robinsons or go elsewhere do buy cosmetics. They're not as expensive, but they do wear it. I don't think it's something that's... and I think it's going to be a segmentized or discriminatory tax because the only people who will be affected is really one side. I know some men wear makeup, but that's completely almost irrelevant. So I think it can be struck down as being sex-linked, in fact.
Really?
Meaning it's gender biased. And I can't agree. I can't agree.
You can't agree.
I mean, I don't think my wife will let me come home if I agree to that.
Well, sir, we have a question from Facebook. So babalik tayo sa estate taxes really quick from Ms. Lala Rimando. On estate taxes, which is often mentioned in tax discussions, how much really are we expecting to collect when all these estate tax-related reforms are implemented, and when? When will the implementation be?
Yeah. First is we're not collecting practically anything today anymore.
Okay.
So, like I said, it's 0.08 of total tax collection. So we can't. It can just be in the upside because in terms of reporting, very few now report. In fact, in 2013, to my recollection, only 6% of those where you had people who die above 30, only 6% of them actually filed for estate taxes. So for a great number of them, they actually don't report estate taxes. Why? It's too expensive, it's too cumbersome, it's too complicated, it's too complex. So they don't. So like I said, there's literally nothing that's happening today. How much? I have no idea. I have no idea as of the moment, simply because it's too difficult to project of the 94% who did not report in 2013, how much of them actually had properties and how much of them had this amount of property. But certainly what I'm sure of is it's going to unlock many properties and make them disposable and liquefy them. That I am certain. We're hoping that before the end of this year, that Senator Sonny Angara has been the chairman of the Committee on Ways and Means in the Senate, has been vocal of his support. So we hope that by the end of the year it will become a law.
Okay. Well, one last question for today on taxes, sir. When the House passed the bill removing the uniform tax on cigarettes, naging controversial ito, sir. Masyado daw mabilis ang naging debate sa floor. And parang hindi na daw, essentially the bill is gonna stop, if it's passed into law, it's gonna stop the full implementation of the sin tax law, which was one of the, I think, flagship, o parang one of the, parang magagandang laws, I think, na lumabas during the previous administration. So, do you agree with the passage of this bill sa House last year?
Yeah, you have to remember that the only thing that, first is let's put it in context.
Okay.
By 2017, the sin tax law had a 5-year phase-in implementation program, whereby we imposed two taxes or two tariffs on two kinds of cigarettes: high price, low price, and each one would increase per annum until such time come to in 2018 that the tariff would be the same regardless of what the nature of the cigarette is.
Excuse me.
But obviously there was a protest by some sectors, meaning by the local farming industry.
And even the Department of Finance. Also.
Yes, but it really cut both ways. Meaning Department of
How so?
Finance thinks that it should be unitary because it's easier to implement. But at the same time, the representatives from up north, the Northern Alliance and the tobacco-producing provinces felt like we need to create that distinction between the high price and the low price because they wanted to protect the local farmers. The reason for that is they said that the low price cigarettes are the ones that actually consume and buy the local products. So if we actually make it unitary, it's going to kill the low price cigarettes and only the imported products are going to survive, effectively affecting their own respective areas. I think the threshold question there is, regardless of whether it is unitary or it is two-tiered, are we going to collect more money? There are two objectives of the sin tax law. It is first and foremost a health measure. It's intended to curb smoking because billions of pesos are actually spent on this non-communicable disease. And secondly is that we're supposed to raise revenue. So I think we need to just approach it from that standpoint. I think it's not entirely accurate to say that we are forestalling the sin tax implementation to its fullest because in fact, it's taking on a direction that it maintains the two-tier but it's increasing the tariff. In fact, to my recollection, if I'm not mistaken, the tariff would have been like at 40 pesos unitary-wise and then increasing every 5 years. But what's happening now is instead of 40, they're increasing it to 44 pesos and 48 pesos. So that's my recollection. So in terms of revenue side, I think it's been argued that revenue actually is going to be much bigger. And at the same time, health-wise, it makes it less affordable for people to buy it. Again, the question now is really how fast the process was. It's a pretty controversial issue.
Well, if you were still a Ways and Means Committee chairperson, would you have supported this bill?
Well, first, as chairman, you have to remember that you try to maintain just like even during my time, meaning particularly when it came to industries, it was important always that you had to take a neutral stand on many things, but direct it. And I have to disclose also that Philip Morris is in my district. In fact, the second biggest manufacturing plant is the biggest employer in my district. So, of course, I had my own biases, and yet at the same time, I also had the function to perform. It was important that I be also perceived as and looked at, not just be be fair, but to be perceived as fair.
All right.
And I'd like to preserve it until today.
All right. Well, now let's go to the Liberal Party. You are a member
What's
of,
that?
of the Liberal Party, and
Parang I've rarely heard that party in good light
and
recently.
interesting and dynamic ng LP in the House because most of you, I think there are 29 of you?
27.
27. Most of you are in the majority allied with President Rodrigo Duterte's Partido Demokratiko, Pilipino Lakas ng Bayan. And I think there are 5 other congressmen who are in the opposition bloc. So I guess how is it like being in the LP and allied with the President, considering that as of the moment, VP Leni Robredo is no longer in the cabinet?
When you look at excise taxes, no? We're still about taxes,
Ikaw
no?
talaga, sir.
Ano ba pinag-usapan natin?
So, about the LP in the House.
LP, the lonely party, ha? Oo, talagang, it's difficult. I think it's a ticklish issue right now. It's in a flux. I think one thing I'm certain about is from 100, close to 130 members after the elections, we've been decimated to just 32. People we would not expect would leave the party left, but it's a natural progression. No love lost, meaning that's how it is. We also did it in 2010, meaning when we came into power, there were just, when Pinoy became president, there were just 48 of us. And eventually, by the time we ended 6 years later, we were at 130. So, of course, this Congress has just been more dramatic because they only had 2. Now they're
Yes.
like 120. So, the shift has been torrential, to say the least. The party remains. I mean, the good thing about it is like what VP Lenny has always been saying, and I myself is that. Well, at least we're left with people we know we can truly work with and we can trust will not.
Okay.
Ito na yung pinaka-harden, kumbaga. Ito na yung may paninindigan para sa partido. I'm not belittling the guys who left. Of course, I feel bad, you know.
Of course.
Yeah, sometimes I want to belittle them, but anyway. No, but yeah, it's difficult at this point in time. When we made the decision, 3 weeks before opening of Congress last year that we were going to be in the minority. We were going to be in the minority and that Speaker Belmonte was going to be our minority leader.
But it changed at the very last minute.
Changed the very last minute when Speaker Belmonte also realized that the majority bloc were shepherding people to form another minority, which is going to be more than us. Meaning when that happened, from like 36, we became 32 in a matter of a day. And then after that, they were able to marshal 50 people to join a minority, which is now going to be and we were not going to be the minority. And Speaker Belmonte said, we're going to be ineffective if we're not going to take the minority leadership. Meaning if the majority bloc has already been able to form the supposed new minority, we were going to be completely outside of, and it was going to be unfair to everyone. Because when you vie for the minority leadership and you don't win it, you become independent members. And the fact is, you don't have a membership. You cannot vote in the committees. You're a last priority in terms of that. And, you know, Speaker Belmonte made a leadership call. He said that it's going to be unfair to everyone. Let's just have a critical cooperation with the majority bloc.
So it's a matter also of political survival in the House.
It's not. I wouldn't want to call it political survival, but it's really real politics.
Okay.
At that point in time, you know, when you try to determine it, is had we moved, the few of us who would have stayed in the minority, regardless of whether we were going to lose a minority, in my count, we were like 11. Counting the 5 who remained there, it was just going to be 11. And the real politic decision there was, okay, so there's going to be 11 of us, why not? We'll be the hardened um, opposition. We'll do it on a daily basis. But ultimately, the party would have been completely decimated.
Well, Congressman, you are Deputy Speaker also. So, you have a position in the House. Hindi ba mahirap, halimbawa, that there are certain, may legislative agenda ang Pangulo and, you know, you can't help but disagree on certain issues. Is it difficult, have you always found it, is it difficult to express dissenting opinion in the House or hindi naman?
I think I'll be lying if you say that your hands are more tied up if you're part of the leadership. But this is democracy, meaning unlike if you're in the opposition, it's incumbent upon you, whether you agree with or whether you disagree with the position of the administration, you have to disagree simply because it is your role to galvanize the sharpest position that best benefits the country. But it can be difficult, but I think there's enough. That's why it's a democracy, and the reason for which we accepted it is that we are free to disagree with a number of measures. Even within PDP Laban, even within NPC and the Nationalista Party, or even NUP. I know for a fact that the chairman of many standing committees, of the most powerful committees now, don't agree with the death penalty on a personal basis. So I think that's going to be a challenge, but it's something that that is there's more than enough space for you to ventilate your opposition.
I see. And hindi naman kayo pinipigilan ng House leadership to
Hindi naman.
express?
Hindi naman.
Alright.
Pero I think if you're part of the leadership, you also have to be conscious
Of course.
that you fight your battles. Hindi yung porkit it's like a family. You know, you come together as neighbors and you decide that this is the direction. There are certain things you debate against, but when the organization decides that this is the direction, then you go with that. Unless, of course, it is so diametrically opposed to your beliefs, you get out of the kitchen and be part of the opposition.
Okay, well,
But it has not reached that at this point.
well, will there come a time in the future, you think, that LP would take on the role of being the opposition party against PDP Laban? Again, considering that VP Robredo resigned and she's been staunchly opposing some of the major thrusts of the Duterte administration, including the death penalty.
Well, it could be the Nationalista Party, it could be the NUP, it could be the NPC, it could be anyone for that matter. But right now, obviously, there's the likelihood is it's more of the LP because of VP Lenny. But even VP Lenny has categorically told us that we should stay with the majority, meaning let's try to work on the bills and laws which we feel like the country needs. It is not to. I don't look forward to that. I mean, let me just point out that I don't look forward to a divided Congress.
Okay.
So far, Speaker Alvarez has lent to us an even hand.
Okay.
And has treated us much like he treats other parties. And I don't see any reason why we should anticipate that there's going to be a war. But certainly, if there are major disagreements that are contrary to the principles and history of the party, we will not hesitate to sever.
All right. Well, sir, there's been, again, I think this would be one of my last few questions. Ayun, meron tayong bagong controversy on the Vice President, Lenny Leaks, and supposed plot to oust the President. Again, I must ask, is LP even planning to oust the President at this point in time? Do you even have the capability to do so?
Yeah, just like taxes is first, you need to see if they have the capacity, right? I mean, we are obviously a decimated party at this point. We are outnumbered, but we're never outfought. But you need some numbers to be able to do that. Like I said, is there a reason to remove the president at this point in time? I mean, that's a threshold question. You have 77% of people who are satisfied. I don't think any person who thinks about removing a president with that popularity is not only anti-Philippines, but is downright stupid. So it's all hogwash. And whoever it's an invention. by somebody who's got very little, who's got so much time in their hands. And probably a preemptive move, meaning I don't think it speaks well of they're doing a disservice to the president
I see.
because unintentionally they're making the president insecure, which he is not.
Of course. Mukha namang hindi.
Which he is not. But with these efforts and these things, it's obviously a trial balloon technique. They raise it so that they can paint people who criticize as being not just there to criticize, but there to overthrow. I think in the long run is that it raises more questions. Why is there a need to overthrow? So I think it unduly betrays some people's insecurity. And I don't think it's fair to the president.
All right. Thank you so much, Congressman Miro, for accommodating Rappler today.
Pleasure. I feel like, I went through a gauntlet there. Anyway.
There you have it. Deputy Speaker Miro Quimbo joins us today and talks about his tax reform proposal and the dynamics for the Liberal Party in the House of Representatives. I am Mara Cepeda. Join us again next time.